Hey guys, welcome to the As a Leader Goes podcast. I am your host, Ken Joslin, where we are ridiculously passionate about helping business leaders build confidence, gain clarity, and create community. And I've got a treat for you guys today. For those of you guys that have followed my journey over the past 14, 15 months, as far as uncovering and revealing trauma from my teenage years to sharing at the Create Conference about my story, Amy Fiedler. See, I almost did it wrong. Do you like that? Amy Fiedler, we literally just talked about this off air, is one of a few people that I follow on Instagram. She's a trauma support specialist, trauma survivor. She's got a podcast called Connect the Dots Bitch Pod, I guess. Is that right? Am I right on that?
Yes.
Awesome.
Right.
I love it. But she's one of the ones that I love. And so if you follow me on Instagram, a lot of you do, you'll see me reposting Amy stuff a lot. Amy, welcome to the As a Leader Grows podcast.
Ken, what an intro. Thank you so much for having me here.
You're welcome. Hey, take just a minute. I gave you a little bit of what was on your bio. Take a minute and tell our audience real quick about who you are and what you actually do.
Sure. So as Ken said, I'm a trauma support specialist and a trauma and abuse survivor myself. What really got me into this line of work was my own journey in struggling with relationships. I struggled probably from a very young age in my teens. I started going to therapy then, couldn't really figure out how to navigate relationships in a healthy way. Grew up in a toxic stress environment as a child. And as we know, that really impacts the way we connect with people as we become an adult. And it led me down the path of ending up with a lot of different romantic relationships, men who didn't really respect me, but I didn't really know how to respect myself either. And navigating those was deeply painful and challenging. When you come out the other side, you realize I need to really help myself. And as you start to help yourself, you're like, I need to share this with everyone else. So who I work with now are people who have been through traumatic or abusive relationships of any kind. It could be romantic, friendship, family dynamics. I work with them after they have been through those things, and now we're trying to cultivate healthy, supportive, safe relationships in their life. So it's all of the navigation of the nuances and the struggles and the triggers and the mindset that come after the fact. And a lot of people don't really dig into that because a lot of people haven't been through it themselves. So I feel like I give a little bit of a extra oomph to this work because I've been through it personally.
Because it's personal and you're passionate about it. I shared a little bit of my story off air. A lot of you guys that follow this podcast, you've heard me share my story, my big aha moment about 15 months ago with my therapist, really kind of uncovering some trauma that had been in my life since I was 13. And I was 53 years old then. That was about a year and a half ago. And, you know, it's 40 years of having trauma. And one of the things I mentioned to you a little bit about having Lauren, who's my somatic therapist and my dating and relationship coach. She's a super good friend of mine. And we were on stage at my Create Conference, and I came up after I shared my story. I talked about trauma, and I wanted, because my question was, even to you off air and to Maxine, my therapist 15 months ago, was how in the world is this here? And I didn't know about it. Yeah. And I really started looking, and I realized that if you can't set and keep healthy boundaries, or if you react versus respond, it's a sign that there's trauma is there that you may have no idea is there. Walk me through, Amy, a little bit of your story when you had that, because that was my aha moment in that office with Maxine. I went, oh my gosh, like this is so real. Tell our audience a little bit about your story and when you kind of had that aha moment of, wow, I've got this trauma in my life and I didn't even know it was there. And now how do I deal and process with it?
You know, it's so fascinating because I realized at a young age, and as a teenager, you know, you're getting to know people, you're feeling out your romantic relationships, your friendships, things like that. And every time I had a struggle emotionally, I'd go to my mom and my mom would react to me. And this was such a pattern that occurred. I, as the child, started to wonder, like, who can I talk to if I can't talk to my own mother? My mother is making it worse. Like, I'm already in tears. And now you're screaming and yelling at me, causing more tears and more pain. This isn't helping me. So I knew this basic level of like, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel supportive. I had yet to figure out the relationship struggles. I just knew in that moment, I needed somebody who was supportive, who wasn't going to react to me, which took me to that next step of getting in to see a professional and trying to talk about what I was struggling with. And all they wanted to talk about was my parents. And as a teenager, they were like, do your parents want to come in? I was like, no, you don't want to do that, because they get mad when I'm just crying at home. Like, they come in here, it's going to be worse for me when I go home. So I think when you get to that place and you're like, well, this type of therapy was not helping me. My parents weren't people I could turn to for that guidance. So you start to try to figure it out yourself, because at the end of the day, that's all you can control is yourself. So I just started to look inward, and I kind of went on a spiritual journey first to try to discover, like, how can I figure out myself and figure out why there's a disconnect between how I connect with people? Why is there this pattern of behavior where I always end up feeling this way in all of these relationships? So that's what I really noticed. I noticed a lack of support, and then this pattern in my life specific to romantic relationships for me. And obviously connected to my parental relationships.
And so you took this deep dive spiritually to try to figure out, who is Amy? What does this look like for me? Why are these, you're trying to connect the dots really and kind of put two and two together on why do I keep having these problems? Walk us through kind of what you discovered in that process.
Well,
Like what was the change in some of the things you did to get better?
So that took many years.
Yeah.
That took many years. I mean, it probably started when I was around like 13, 14 years old, going to conventional types of therapy. Then they handed me medication for it. I didn't love that idea. I went off medication, kind of took more spiritual route, started to get to know myself and my connection to the world from there, right? So working inward, then outward, instead of hyper fixating on why doesn't this person like me or this person like me, like really trying to connect to me. And then ultimately getting to a place where Google is your friend. I started Googling to try to understand more about different alternative methods that I could take to discover, how can I help my anxiety without being medicated? Right. And again, the conventional types of therapists that I had seen were not offering me an alternative to that. They weren't really helping me understand. So it was this deep interest in myself of like, I want to understand what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. Now that I understand myself and my relationship to the world at large a little bit better. And so I really dug into trying to understand my emotions, trying to define them, trying to figure out how to manage them and cope with them single-handedly, mind you, not with a professional's help, just really trying to self-discover through books, and really a lot of journaling and a lot of meditation got me to a place where I had more of a foundation of how do I manage my anxiety? How do I manage, when somebody is mistreating me, what do I do? What do I say? Nobody taught me boundaries. There were no boundaries growing up. So it's ironic that I teach boundaries now, because I had to teach them to myself. And I realized I had to kind of take charge in my own life, because I felt very helpless every time I turned to a person outside of myself for that guidance and support. So I needed to find a way to connect to what I was feeling and what I was doing from the inside out. And that's what I did. And I started to take those practical steps and really make sense of, okay, if I speak this way and I direct a person in the direction I want them to go, I want them to treat me, I'll get a little more respect coming at me, instead of just reacting to them and shouting, you need to respect me, which is what I grew up hearing my entire life.
When was the moment where you said, listen, I want to take what I've went through and I want to help other people get better. I want to help them discover and understand what's going on in their heart and in their life. And I want to help them navigate this journey so they can get through the journey a little bit faster than I was able to get through this journey.
Yeah, I think, and you can probably connect to this in sharing your own story. There's something that happens when you start to connect those dots in yourself, right? You want an outlet, you want to share it. If that's with one person or 300 people, it doesn't matter. You want to share it with somebody because there's just like this overflow of, oh my God, it makes sense to me. And now I know it's going to help and make sense for somebody else in their circumstances. For me, it started with a change in my career path. See, after college, I was working in the fashion industry. I thought I was going to do wardrobe styling. And that's what I was doing for, a couple years after college, but it wasn't satisfying. I was still struggling emotionally. I wasn't happy. And I got to this place where I just said to myself, I want to be happy. This doesn't make me happy. I need to figure out what makes me happy. And I literally sat down, and this is the silliest thing, but this is exactly what I did. I sat down with a journal and I made lists of everything I could think of that made me happy. And it didn't make sense. I'm sure if anyone read this list, it wouldn't make sense to them. I was like, the beach, like the color blue. It was like just a random list of things.
Right.
But something that kept coming up was helping other people. And then I was like, well, maybe I should help other people. And I didn't know what that would look like. I didn't necessarily, I went to college, I graduated, my focus was photography and art, though it wasn't psychology. I switched majors. So it started off psychology and then I went in a different direction. I didn't want to go back to college, but I wanted to be able to help people and support them in the way that supported me most, which was more alternative, right? And a little unconventional, but it helped me and it changed my life. And so I genuinely thought I made up the profession of life coaching. That's how little knowledge I had of life coaches at that time. And this was 2012, 2013. So it's not like they didn't exist, but they weren't as popular and known, I feel like, as they are now. And I Googled and I was like, oh, life coach is a thing. I can do that. And so that's where I went with it. I was like, I can help people. I don't have to go the conventional route and go become a licensed therapist. That never resonated with me, but I can do it in a way that is more authentic and works for me. And so that's what I did. And from there, I've obviously expanded my education and really dove into a more kind of niche area with trauma.
Walk us through a little bit of your relationship history. Because that's the one thing that I've seen over the past, I know, right? I have to feel the same way you do when somebody asks me that question. It's like some of the things that are in you, or some of the trauma, or some of the effects of trauma, you have no ideas in there until you get into an intimate kind of partnership relationship, and then stuff just starts to surface.
Yeah.
Walk us through that. Is that normal? Is that okay? What do you do when those things start happening in your relationship?
Well, I think it depends on the relationship, right? Like if you're with somebody who is not able to take accountability or self-reflect or even hear you, which was my pattern, I went after men in my life who seemed successful, seemed to financially have it all together. So we could say on a very surface level, rich, successful men. And it wasn't like a conscious thought process either. I just remember that's what was attracted to me and that's what I leaned into. And so I felt safe. And I know the reason I felt safe was because my mom couldn't always support me emotionally, but she could support me financially. My dad was very non-emotional. It was hard to just get him to say, you look pretty today, or I love you. So I begged for his attention, and I had the stability of my mother's, financial support, but everything lacked that emotional support. And so I chased after these emotionally unavailable men who abused that power and authority with their money, there was a dynamic of me kind of fawning and chasing after and not having any self-identity. So in other words, my pattern, I knew, was I needed a man to accept me and approve of me and want to keep me. And I chose people who I thought could take care of me because I didn't feel taken care of growing up. And so I could see that strong, I mean, all the way back to high school. Like my first boyfriend came from a well-to-do family who owned like a chain of McDonald's. And I was like, I felt like a hot shot going to senior prom in his BMW. And I was like, oh, this is the trajectory of my life. And it became that, but it wasn't really something to brag about because it was these empty relationships where I felt discarded, unimportant. I felt only valued by the way I looked or how I could please and appease somebody by acquiescing into what they needed or wanted. And I felt the same way I felt as a child, neglected, dismissed, unimportant, begging for attention, not having anyone who really understood me or could support me emotionally. But you got money. So yeah, you'll take me on vacation.
Walk me through the moment where you had that, oh my gosh, I've got to stop this cycle. Like when you were like, I cannot do this anymore. Walk me through that kind of that moment you had.
That moment was I was in a relationship with somebody and it lasted a little under a year. And I thought at that time, I'm going to marry this person. This is the person. But there were so many signs beforehand that were like, you are not marrying this person. One being my brother saying, and I am very close with my brother. I trust my brother's perspective, his judge of character. He was like, he is not a good guy. He is not. And I was like, you just don't like him because you were in the same grade. They happened to go to high school together. He was like, no, he's not a good guy. And I defended my boyfriend at the time. And so that was like sign number one, where I was like, why are you not supportive of me being in a good relationship finally? Well, everybody looked at it as not a good relationship and not me. So when it ended a little under a year, I really was convinced in my own mind, this is it. And then he went and moved on to somebody else, unbeknownst to me, while still contacting me and knowing that I still had feelings. And this cycle of me not knowing he had moved on with somebody else and me still trying to be mature and change my own patterns. So not just diving in saying, we can talk about this. Like I'm interested. I would like to get back together, but we have to talk. And him playing these games lasted 6 years. Wow. And so in the midst of this 6-year cycle of me answering these sporadic text messages from this person who was just playing these head games with me, I got tired and I was like, enough. It just slowly peeled back these layers where I was like, I don't deserve this. Why? What am I doing? Why? This is not changing. It's dragging on. I'm doing things differently. I'm speaking differently. I'm responding differently. It's not changing my circumstances. So why am I staying in this circumstance? I need to do something very differently here. And so I cut contact completely and I went ahead, and that's really where everything kind of cracked open for me. And I was able to move forward and kind of break that pattern of chasing after these unavailable men.
I love that. One of the things you talk about a lot is trauma survivors in relationships. And you really do hit a lot. I'm sitting here looking at your IG page right now. It's Amy, the life coach, for those of you guys that want to follow her. And I'm just telling you, therapy, I've been saying this for 20 years even when I was in ministry, therapy's like preventive maintenance. It's like you change your oil in your car every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, not when your engine locks up. Like it's something you constantly need. I have 2 therapists that I talk to all the time. It's something you need people in your life to have a 10,000 foot view, especially if you're in a partnership, if you're in an intimate relationship, somebody's got to be able to have a view that's going to be a little different, a little different angle than you and your partner do. One of the things you talk about a lot is the trauma survivor's nervous system and how they react in safe environments. And I realized this in the last year as I begin to discover, oh, normal for me is, craziness. So when it is normal and it's safe, my central nervous system goes, whoa, hang on just a minute. And then what I found myself doing, I didn't realize this until, I don't know, probably 8 months ago, 7-8 months ago, I would cause friction and elevate, the temperature in the relationship, because that was normal to me. That meant we were loved. That meant everything was great. If we're arguing or bickering, or we're raising our voice or yelling, and then we'd make up, everything's fine. But that's not normal. Walk us through somebody who's listening to this podcast today, Amy, that goes, oh my gosh, I'm hearing your story and I've heard Ken's story. Man, there may be some things inside of me that I wasn't aware was there. What are some more symptoms or some more things that people can recognize in their life that will reveal some unresolved trauma?
So always start with looking at patterns, right? If you have a pattern of relationships ending a certain way, or a certain fight in a relationship that you have, again, any kind of relationship, even if it's not specific to romance, because I think people tend to group it there, it could be within your family or a friendship. So patterns is number one. Number two, as you said, recreating chaos is a very common symptom of trauma. I had something very similar to you, where if I defined love as chaotic without knowing that was my definition of love, right? We lean into what feels familiar to our nervous system. And it's not always a conscious thought process. We lean into the things that, like I naturally leaned into men who had qualities that my mom had or my dad had, right? It's familiar. So familiar feels like home. But if home was not healthy, then what you're leaning into might not be healthy for you. So looking at what is familiar for you. Is it familiar to connect with people through complaints and gossip? Because that's another symptom of that. Do you not know how to be honest and open and vulnerable in your relationships, right? We talk about intimacy problems. We talk about somebody who's emotionally available. Well, you're able to self-reflect. You're able to acknowledge your feelings. You're not uncomfortable when somebody expresses their emotions to you. So this can work both ways. You can look at yourself, but you can also look at how you're reacting to other people. Are you extremely uncomfortable when someone opens up to you? And, we need a little more context to that. What is the reason why you're uncomfortable, right? Are you uncomfortable seeing somebody cry? That's something worth looking at.
And what would somebody who has something like that, like they're afraid to, like when a partner would bring something up in a romantic relationship, they immediately feel attacked, or they immediately feel like they need to. And I read this in my good friend G.S. Youngblood's book, The Way of the Masculine, or the masculine relationship, about how the masculine's role in a partnership is to hold space. So the female partner feels safe, seen, and heard. Well, I had to send an email to my ex-wife and an ex-girlfriend, because I realized when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, I did not do that. I immediately went into defend and explain.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I did, or here's what my heart was. And what happened was, every time they would get elevated, instead of holding space, I would get elevated, and then they got elevated, and you got a train wreck, 2 to 3 minutes later. And then you're like, the one thing that I needed out of each of those relationships that I never got was an apology for the way they came at me, because I took that away from them by getting elevated myself. Walk us through just being able to have healthy conversations that may have some, because I think when we hear healthy, we think tension free.
Yeah, no.
No. But I think that especially people that have had trauma, they think healthy is like tension free. I mean, walk us, how do you have a tension filled conversation with your partner and it not have to necessarily go to the next level?
Well, we have to take responsibility for ourselves and our emotional state first. And this is where a lot of us are lacking those key foundational skills, right? If we've never been taught how to self-regulate through parental co-regulation, which is what teaches us to self-regulate. Like if mom and dad didn't demonstrate that self-soothing and help us regulate our nervous systems as children, then we grow up lacking the skills to self-regulate. And a lot of adults lack the skills to self-regulate. And so what happens is we get into a relationship and we're not managing our emotions, and we react instantaneously to the way somebody is communicating with us. Whereas now, if you communicate with me, it also comes down to how you're communicating, right? Because you might not mean to sound like you're attacking me, but the way you're using your words might be received that way. So we have to watch both ends of this. But if I'm managing my emotions, I have the ability to then say to you, I don't appreciate or I can't hear what you're saying to me when you speak to me in that tone, or when you come at me this way, or however you want to say it that's authentic to you. I can't hear you. So if you can speak to me in a way where you take ownership over your emotions, and this is what I teach when it comes to healthy communication, is speak from the I perspective. Take claim over what belongs to you, your behavior, your feelings, your thoughts, your belief system, your words, they're yours. So I feel this way. I perceive this situation this way. And then you can address them and their behavior and what they're doing. But if we can't take a breath, hold space in our body for that uncomfortable emotion first and foremost, then we're not going to get to the point where we can then communicate that way. So it's like this, this building process, right, of these skills where you got to manage those emotions. Managing those emotions means practice breath work. Practice taking a breath before speaking, before reacting to something. Return to the text message or the email or the voicemail an hour later, reread it, re-listen to it. You're in a different mindset at that point. Your nervous system will calm down in 15 to 20 minutes. So you'll come back and you'll have a whole different lens. And I've done that a million times where.
So Amy, you're saying it's not good to just fire off back a text message or an email or a voicemail?
I mean, listen, I'm a very quick responder to most people. So I get the urge, but if it's a neutral subject, yeah, go for it. If it's a little emotionally charged, no, I'd take a pause,
Right. Talk about some of the skills in a relationship, having a conversation, to be able, I know you talked about breath work. What are some of the other things you can do when you feel like you're getting elevated when you're having a conversation with your partner?
We exit the environment,
And how do you do that the right way?
Well, so I teach people to witness their behavior, right? So if you know that when you have a heated conversation, or let's say you perceive conflict as always being bad, let's say you fear conflict and you like myself for a long time felt like it always was going to lead to abandonment. So the minute conflict arose in my relationship, I was like, we're not doing this, right? So if I know that about myself later, when I'm regulated, I'm going to sit down, and that's when you do the work, right? Sit down and reflect on what is my pattern of behavior every time. And people don't like to do this, but this is so worthwhile. And this is how you change your patterns. Take the time, even if it's 5 minutes after the hard conversation, after that conflict, to reflect on it. Then what you'll find is I get uncomfortable, I get triggered. This is the trajectory of that. I will do this, like you, I'll sabotage, I'll pack my bag and leave, whatever it is, right? If that's what I do, what do I want to do instead? Who do I want to be? This isn't rocket science, it's a choice. Who do you want to be instead? What is more aligned with you as an individual now? And write it out. Give yourself direction. I can't tell you how many times in my journal I've sat down and said, we are doing this instead of this, Amy. Like that is what we're doing. And that is how I retain it. And then the next time it happens, I go, this is my little one-liner. I'll say, I need time to process this. Can we have this conversation in a few hours? Once I exit the environment, I go, I sit down, I calm down, I take some time, and then I return and I have a clearer mind and a more regulated system.
I love that. Just even in my life, I talked a little bit about my story off air, and a lot of people have heard my story before. Was even in relationships. Now I've told myself that you're not leaving. You're not packing a bag. This is what you are not going to continue this behavior. Because, and I love what you said just a minute ago. You said something about looking at you. It's the I point of view, not what my partner's doing, not what somebody else is doing to me, but how am I going to take accountability over my behavior, over my actions, over the things that I say, over getting, am I going to take accountability over me getting, heightened or, taking a conversation to the next level? What are some things that if somebody that's listening to this podcast today, this is kind of triggering some things with them. They're going, oh my gosh, like I grew up in this kind of a situation, or I've been in this kind of relationships. What do they need to do?
To start, they need to acknowledge it to themselves. That's always step one, right? Get honest with yourself. And awareness, that's the first step. So what's the second step is, what do I want to do next? What I need to change? What am I struggling with? And that's different per person. A lot of people, when they apply to work with me, one of the questions on my application is, what do you see as the problem that you're struggling with right now? Detail it out to me. Just tell me the story. And then from there, the way they explained it, what happens is people type paragraphs and I read it. And I go, okay, no, you think it's these surface problems, but the root issue is really this unprocessed trauma, or the root issue is whatever. And so then I email back and I go, you're accepted. And this is what we would focus on if we work together. And and then they're like, how did you know? Well, I'm good at what I do, but also everybody gets stuck on these surface things. We think it's that person. We think it's, whatever is easy to see, it's tangible. We can see it, touch it, taste it, smell it. But the issue is in here. This is the issue.
Why do you think we don't look there first?
That's uncomfortable. Are you kidding? Yeah. Like, radical accountability is not what people like to do. A lot of people find it easier to deflect, to project, to avoid, to hide from those emotions. It's just some of us, like myself, learned in a very messed up way, mind you, but learned that, I can't depend on anyone else to take accountability in the house I grew up in. I have to, and it's all I can control. And when you learn that very quickly, then you're like, okay, well, this argument with my partner or my friend, I can't control them, but I can control what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm believing, how I'm behaving. And if I can control that and set my boundaries with this person, everything else is going to work itself out. Even if working it out means we realize we don't value and respect the same things, and we can't have the same type of relationship.
You talk a lot about self-sabotage, somebody that's had trauma, self-sabotaging. And we shared a little bit earlier and maybe even off air about how I understand now that if I'm in a relationship and I'm with my partner for, 6 days in a row, 7 days, 8 days, I'm telling myself after about 3 or 4 days, man, this is normal. This is healthy. This is good. Cause it's almost boring, I guess. Is that what you would say?
Yeah.
Because nobody's gotten elevated, that, okay, my nervous system, it subconsciously is going to try to create some shit that's not really even there, so it can feel normal to me. I know you're shaking your head going, yes, that's exactly how that works, Ken. Walk us through, because it took me a while to get to where I was aware that that's what I would do. Walk us through that process of self-sabotage and how it really reveals trauma from our childhood.
Well, everybody's sabotage is different, right? But let's take yours, for instance. Have you ever been to Disney World?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So like, let's say you go on Tower of Terror, right? And when you've been on Tower of Terror, you know that thing is going to drop, and it's going to drop very unexpectedly, and you're going to get that thrill and that adrenaline rush. And if you haven't been on Tower of Terror, you don't know what to expect. In a relationship, when you're sabotaging, you're the dude who's been on Tower of Terror 10 plus times. You're dating someone who's going on it for the very first time. And suddenly it drops and you're like, yeah, I saw that coming. That's great. This is a high for me. And they are screaming at the top of this is not normal. This is going to break. This is not good. Okay. When you put that into the relationship context and you are suddenly realizing I've got this pattern, right? Of like, I need to recreate this high. I need to recreate that adrenaline rush that I'm so used to. You have to get sick of that before you can change it. And people hate when I say this, because there's like, someone could point it out to you a dozen times, Ken, until you're ready to see it and hear it. You're not going to see it and hear it, right? You got to be open and willing to see it and hear it. And really, that means you have to be connected to it. You have to, in some way, shape, or form, be sick of that feeling yourself, be sick of that outcome yourself. And if you're not sick of that, you're going to keep doing it until you get sick of it. And that is undetermined for every person, right? That there's no timeline to that. So when people are like, how do I spot these patterns? Well, you've got to be curious, and you've got to have at least a desire for something healthier, something better. Because if you're desiring a sustainable, safe, supportive relationship, and then you notice, well, my pattern is that I create a problem when it feels safe, or by definition is safe and supportive and kind of smooth sailing. Do those align? No, right? But until we get to that openness to want to look at that, it's just our default setting. We're on autopilot and we go, 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 go until we bang our head into a wall and we wake up.
I love that. Talk a little bit. We got a couple more minutes. Talk a little bit about what healthy conflict looks like in a relationship.
I love this question, because I was somebody who never had it modeled to me. Like, healthy conflict was non-existent growing up for me. It was screaming and yelling and punishment and name calling, and it wasn't a safe environment for a kid. So when I became an adult, I thought, hey, that meant love. And I didn't know how to actually resolve conflict with people, because that wasn't ever anything we dealt with growing up. It was just, you're to blame, Amy, take accountability, go apologize, even if you did nothing. And I think I just said this to someone the other day, actually, in our house, if one kid, I have two siblings, so if one of us did something, all three of us got punished. It wasn't, oh, Amy, you were wrong, we're going to hold you accountable. It was, Amy, you did something, all three of you are in trouble. And so you never learned how to navigate your own stuff. So you're always grouped together with everyone else. So anyway, so when you get into a situation and you realize, I don't know what this looks like, and I don't actually believe it exists, like, I deemed all conflict unhealthy. I had to realize that it was safe to disagree. Like, you're allowed to. I wasn't allowed to growing up. You're allowed to disagree with people. There's a respectful way to do it. You don't have to name call. You don't have to, degrade someone or shame someone, but you can disagree with them. You can have a different belief system or a different perspective. You can argue about dumb little things, but you can also then sit down and have an honest conversation. You both can take ownership over your part. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about, we're a team. Even if you're friends, even if you're family, you're a team. And I just want to understand you better. So let's seek to understand. Let's hear each other out. Let's feel validated. And then let's work towards repair. because that's important too, to reconnect, to feel safe again with each other after that conflict.
I love that. Amy, best way for people to get in contact with you?
The best way to get in contact with me, follow me on Instagram at Amy the Life Coach, or head to my website, amyfiedler.com.
I love it. Girl, this has been amazing. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love I post it all the time. I've got several of you that I'll repost your stuff constantly because I read them like, oh my gosh, that's good. And because I lived it out. And I just want to say on behalf of, the hundreds and thousands of people that listen to this podcast, thank you for taking some time. Thank you for doing what you do. And I know the fulfillment, the reward, it's got to feel super rewarding for you doing what you do and watching you being able to change and help navigate people's destinies and futures to where they wind up different than what yours started out to be.
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much, Ken, for having me. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
You're amazing. Guys, go check her out, Amy the Life Coach, on Instagram. Again, her stuff is phenomenal. I'm reposting it all the time. But guys, thanks for joining us on this episode of As the Leader Grows. If this as always, if this has added value to you, do a couple things for me. Number one, hit that subscribe button. Number two, snap a screenshot of this today. Share it. Amy and I will give you a little love on our Instagram as well. And we appreciate you guys joining us. I'll see you next week with my good friend, Jake Butt, former All-American from the University of Michigan. Go Blue. Have a good day.